Kathy. Welcome to the Colorful Homeschooler Podcast, where we parlay on productivity, personality, passions, education, and theory. I'm a lover of Jesus, a wife of 20 years, and a homeschool mama of 4 special needs boys who keep me constantly active. I'm so glad you're here to join me. Pull up a chair. There's space for you at this table. Hello again. Happy Tuesday. When this episode drops, I will have begun our soft start to our homeschool year. So what do I mean by a soft start? I introduce all of our subjects to each child and then go through the different curriculum that we'll be using to satisfy that subject. This may be a curriculum I've written, it may be a curriculum that I've purchased, it may be something we have used before, or it may be something new. I kind of lay it all out for them during the soft start. I don't direct all of their learning, but I do pick a bunch of the resources that they use for the specific goals that they have. And then there are pieces of their learning that are completely parent-directed. We will also begin math and reading next week during the soft start, going over the literature that I've chosen for this year, integrated with the titles that they've selected. With my third born beginning high school this year, that was a deep dive. Just trying to figure out what essays, what short stories, what poetry, which Shakespeare play, what literary novels or reflective books I will use to satisfy what I want him exposed to over the breadth of high school. So I'll go over the choices that I made for this year with them. Then we'll look at our science curriculum and kind of try to get excited together, things like that. So each day we'll sit and read aloud as a family and also have them do their independent reading, as well as select any missing resources for their independently chosen subjects. Right at the beginning of the school year, I don't know, maybe it is just my family, but I feel like we'll look around for, say, the grammar that I thought I had perfectly picked out for my student, and I'm like, oh, where's that secondary book that I wanted you to do on Thursdays? Like, I realize that I have small holes that I need to fill. So the soft start is kind of good for that. So I just told you it was a deep dive to select all of the literature for this year. Well, how do I do it? I thought it might be helpful to go over my process, and maybe some of you are struggling at the beginning of high school or middle school to choose those great books, those great short stories. Maybe you were not a reader, so you're kind of coming to this new and fresh and just becoming a lover of reading yourself. Hopefully this will be helpful for that. How do I choose the readables for our year? How do I choose the short stories, the essays, the poetry? How do I pick which Shakespeare play to read? I know we all want to bring our children solid choices without sacrificing their love of reading, but also not just feeding them a direct funnel of consistent fluff books. I want my children to be excited about reading, but I also just don't want them to know how to read fun series. Total fluff, not literary value. I won't name any for fear of offending some people because I've liked them myself, but I think we all can name quite a few fluff books that have entered our cultural vernacular, and we have to realize that that's probably not the only thing we want to expose our children to. First, let me go over my literary philosophy. It's heavily influenced by Charlotte Mason, but also by Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard was an early 18th century theologian and philosopher, and he's one of my favorites. He said, and I quote, "Take a book, the poorest one written, but read it with the passion that it is the only book you will read. Ultimately, you will read everything out of it, that is, as much as there was in yourself, and you could never get more out of reading, even if you read the best of books." End quote. So for me, it doesn't always need to be high literature. I like a variety, and I want that for my children too, but it's about the balance in my philosophy. So even though I may grab for a fluff novel, I especially like mysteries or the odd Christian romance novel, especially around Christmas time. But I also want to balance that by reading very thought-provoking, deep fiction, excellent reflective literature, and nature essays. So it's about balance. It doesn't always need to be high literature, but we do need to teach our children to read, to plumb the depths of every book they read for all that it can give, to suck the marrow of that book, so to speak. Whether it's literature or a fluff novel about fairies and werewolves, there is value in it. How much and how deep the value is the question we concern ourselves with regularly as a literary sort. So that's my philosophy. Recognize that as I share with you my process for choosing the literature for our homeschool year, or even for myself. If I pre-plan any of my reading, I go through this process as well. So read high, read well, read to learn, read to live, read to grow, read to escape, read to be closer to the Father. If you do, then continue on with me today. I'll share how I choose my books to read with my children, which ones they should read independently, and how I select the further aspects of reading, introducing my children to various types of the written word. So first, the easy ways. There are so many lists online for the must-reads. You can find them on topics, political agendas, literary time periods, time period in a person's life. Googling must-read books for high school, must-read books for a death in the family, must-read books about the Belle Époque in France. So that's an easy jumping off point. There never fails to be someone who wants to tell you what to do. So use it. There are also some carefully curated lists that I return to again and again. I will list these references in the show notes. There is Ambleside Online's list. They are very clear it is not just a book list, and I fully agree. To teach well with their selected literature, you need to understand the philosophy of Charlotte Mason, to dive into her teachings and her method. But it's also a wonderfully researched book list. All Through the Ages is another option. It's called All Through the Ages, History Through Literature. And it's a huge reference guide on time periods, geography, events in history, and it offers great books surrounding those categories. It does not, however, showcase any content considerations. So if you choose a book from that list, you then need to go look it up in a Kirkus review, Google, Amazon review, or Goodreads. Heart of Dakota is another one. Excellent book pack option. So you can kind of plumb through those different book packs and see what appeals to your child. Sabbath Mood Homeschool's science book lists are top-notch. Sunlight's yearly packages offer some good suggestions. And again, I'm not saying buy the whole pack, but you can look through and see what time period they're delving into and then choose one or two of the novels. Or look at what literature they recommend for that year. Not Grass is another one that has excellent book suggestions and a few essay suggestions in their higher level literature courses. Finally, Reshelving Alexandria was formed by a group of women who love living literature. So you can join for as little as $5 a month and have access to amazingly curated book lists based on topic, time period, so many options. And this site has the content considerations listed, which I appreciate so much, and it can really save you a lot of work. So that's a great resource. And again, I will link it in the show notes. And these are all excellent places to begin. So after gathering a bunch of lists together, I usually cross-reference them. For example, on a list of the 20 novels a child must read before graduating high school, I found more than 50 different must-read lists. So I selected a few and I cross-referenced. On most of them, you'll find Animal Farm, The Scarlet Letter, Lord of the Flies, and a John Steinbeck novel represented. Probably Of Mice and Men or Grapes of Wrath. Now, Steinbeck's my favorite author, so he would have been on my list anyway. And probably Nathaniel Hawthorne. But Lord of the Flies I read in 8th grade growing up, so I may or may not expose my children to that novel a little early. William Golding. Animal Farm, same thing. We actually read it as a family when my boys were in 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th grade. And I may have my high schooler reread that, but it is not this year. So I would wager all of those would be present on each list. Okay, check. Same with lists of short stories. Some Flannery O'Connor, Nathaniel Hawthorne, O. Henry, and probably some John Updike. Check, check, check. How about middle grade fiction? Elementary, diverse picture books? There are lists for all of these things. So getting really good at Googling good search terms is going to send you forward quite a bit. But cross-referencing these lists, well, getting the lists and then cross-referencing them is just the beginning, right? So now I need to wade through the weeds and figure out what opens up worlds to my boys. What do I choose? There's too much excellent storytelling in the world throughout all of history to read it all, to put it all in a 4-year or 6-year homeschool curriculum. So don't be silly. How do I pick? Well, I start with some questions. So the first and the biggest one for me is when you start a book and read an excerpt, do you want to continue? Now, if you're just starting out reading yourself, perhaps you've heard the experiment with the marshmallows and instant gratification. Well, try to remove yourself from instant gratification and let me remove those marshmallow-taking tendencies. Let yourself open up to the story. If someone was explaining this to you at a restaurant, would you tune out or try your ever hardest to listen well? If they were telling you this story face to face, would you want to hear the rest of it? Really focus. Try to open your mind to the story to see if you would want to continue. I call this question the readability. I can't pre-read all of my children's books anymore. I've had at any time over 60 books on all of my children's lists, plus free reads and read-alouds. No, I don't have that time. But I can scan it, check for its readability. Check if I would want to listen in. Around a fire, would I lean closer? Or would I use that moment to get up and use the restroom? Second, content considerations. Now, what does that mean? I've used that term a couple of times. So a content consideration would be something within the story, some content that you may object to. So perhaps you don't want your child to learn about death of a parent, perhaps sickness, perhaps diverse representation of characters is important to you. This is all a content consideration that would be important to read about beforehand. So you want to check for any content considerations second. Readability first, second, content considerations. And you can look into that by reading different reviews, by looking through Kirkus reviews. Now, prior to the 1980s, Kirkus was definitely more family-friendly review writing. They were really focused on family values, conservative family values, and they tried to let anybody know if there was something in a book that was objectionable. They don't always do that anymore, which is why I like to check a few review sources to make sure that I can find good information on it. So that's why sometimes the book lists will put at the top, they will say, we took these content considerations into thought before recommending them to you. If there's anything else, you'll have to figure it out on your own. I always appreciate when they do that, especially when you get into the high school level and they start recommending things like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which I would not give to most of my high schoolers. Maybe in senior year, but to me, because of the sexual promiscuity in that book, I would say that's for college level undertaking. Plus, to fully understand the philosophical conundrums that they raise in that book, I think you need an older level of thinking. So that's why it's important to understand the content considerations and choose properly for your family. Okay, next. Does it match my children's interests? Okay, I stretch this one a lot because I don't think they know all of the interests that will excite them in their lives. Charlotte Mason talks about providing a feast to them. So I like to have a few that match their interests, but many that expose them to new realms of interest. Some of the books that we plotted through early on in the pages throughout our homeschool years, well, those, again, plotting early, like, we have to read this. Well, they became our favorites. There was a Charlotte Young book, The Little Duke. I mean, we literally dreaded turning it on. We were listening to it as an audiobook. My youngest would sometimes cry and beg me not to have to listen to it that week. So funny. So I could have given up on it since I found that book quite boring as well during the beginning. Well, wouldn't you know it? But it became one of our favorite books that year. We wound up loving it. We just had to get through the beginning, and then, the depth of the story was beautiful and incredible. We couldn't wait to get to our assigned day of reading that book. How sad that we would have missed out if I never stretched our interests or our thoughts on readability. But there should be some that make them come alive right away. Do you have a fantasy lover? How about My Father's Dragon or the Wilder King trilogy? Do you have a deep thinker? Pull out the Teddy Saga or Echo Mountain. Bolster your lists with a few of these to keep them looking forward to when they can dive into those that day of the week. All right, we've covered readability, content considerations, and interests. What about values or character? What value traits does this speak to? What characterizations qualify our protagonist and antagonist? Does it help drive home a point or a piece of life that we're doing together already? How about family works best when we work together? We'll try the Vanderbeekers of 141st Street, Little Women, or even Heidi. How about hard work as the cornerstone of much happiness? The Little Britches series, or Little Men, maybe Understood Betsy or the Little House books. Selflessness? Lord of the Rings series comes to mind immediately, but also The Girl Who Drank the Moon or Wild Robot. So use books to support your social and emotional learning. I always have some character books in my lineup to open up discussions and help us to broach the harder topics. Especially as your children are getting into the teenage years, we want to prevent them from turning completely internally to seek answers and keep those lines of communication open. And literature is such a good way to do this, to talk about the harder topics when they have to do with someone else in a story. Oh, Lord, thank you that you use stories to speak to us so many times. Finally, if you've been a reader for a long time as I have, what are your memories of that story? Of that short story, of that book, of that essay? I have very poignant memories of the first time reading certain short stories, certain novels, and I want to see how my boys react to it as well. Is there something that made you angry? A book? Or maybe awoke you to a real-life situation that changed how you view the world? Age-dependent, yes. Content considerations, yes. But let them experience that as well. And I would caution you not to preface their reading of it with your experiential epitaphs. Let them visit it as you did, fresh and open to their own interpretation. But how fun those conversations have been with my boys after they finish that reading. And sometimes I do make those our read-alouds so I can see the looks on their faces as they read it. Experience the drama and the joy and the wonder all for the first time, again. I want to see it with them all over again. So this is a similar way that I choose my short stories. So we went over readability, content considerations, interests, values and character, and your memories of it. So same kind of way I choose short stories, but essays are a different breed. Firstly, there aren't many top essays to read lists on the internet. I've scoured high school lit textbooks from different online and hardback sources, but I've been thoroughly unimpressed, often with their choices. So I had to be at square one for this one, but that's okay. First, I struggled to remember essays that have impacted me. I remembered some. My first time reading a Joan Didion was life-changing. Her way with words, her quick wit, her remarkable ability to take everyday occurrence and fill it with meaning that you may or may not have realized was there, but you definitely couldn't articulate until now. Well, check. Didion went on the list. Steinbeck is my favorite author and a prolific essayist. On the list. So whose philosophical ideas have wound their way around the fabric of my adult life? Well, I already mentioned Kierkegaard, also Wendell Berry, Thoreau, C.S. Lewis, and John Taylor Gatto. I looked up legal and political essayists and chose 3 from there. Essays can be long or short. For example, I included one on 9/11. So as a New Yorker, this was written by a New Yorker because it changed the way we see things in my favorite city. And that particular essay is only 1 page long. But it communicates an idea intensely, and I want my son exposed to that level of writing. If you haven't read many essays and don't have self-experience to fall back on, you can look at the lists of the world's best essayists. Then look up their most well-known works and include maybe 2 a year. Pre-read them to check for content and also for whether or not it makes a difference in your life. If it means nothing to you, it won't to your child either. Maybe. This is also an opportunity for a deep dive into their special interests. If your child loves skateboarding, find an essay on adventure, or even an essayist that compares skateboarding with something profound. Maybe your child loves music. Grab a cultural essay on the effects of music on different sects of society. Fascinating. The availability is endless, but it's about finding what's right for you. In the end, your perfect literature list should be varied. It should spread that wide feast and offer many different options. It should include some difficult subjects, some harder topics that will bring forth tough conversations. Reading is a world that crystallizes and clarifies thoughts into cohesive and tangible things. Make sure you're introducing your child to this wide world. And who knows, you may open up parts of the world hitherto unknown to you. When I first went through high school, I included some Ray Bradbury short stories on his list. There Will Come Soft Rains made me weep. My heart broke over the feelings of a house, an inanimate object, and its portrayal of the depth of loneliness. Now that's some good writing. Hopefully this gave you some helpful tips. I'll include all of my links in the show notes. I am an Amazon affiliate, so if you like some of the books I mentioned today, please click on the links and use them. It costs nothing extra to you, but I get a few cents for my family. Yay! Many are available at the library too, so go forth and read well. Thanks for listening today. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Come follow me on Instagram at The Colorful Homeschooler. I'll be going through a few grade level appropriate books. So my first one that I'm diving into is middle grade fiction. Honestly, because I've been reading a lot of it this year and I have developed some of my favorites. So I'll be coming out with some reviews on Instagram of my favorite middle grade fiction. And then if those are well received, I may do some different age groups. Come follow me as The Colorful Homeschooler. Please give me 5 stars, subscribe to this podcast show on your favorite podcasting platform. If you could, please take a minute and write a review on that platform. Writing makes a huge difference in how the algorithm pushes my podcast out to others who are just generally searching. If this helped you, share it with a friend and write me anytime. Let me know how things are going and any topics that you want to hear from me. Remember all, I believe in you.